Welcome to the NativeScript show, where we cut right to the content without delay, just like the framework cuts to the platform. Starting in the top, Josh, what do you got for us?
I was just wanting to speak quickly about being able to customize user experiences to the platform they are used to.
Absolutely. Jamie.
I'll be talking about how NativeScript can be used as a common collaboration point for whether you're a React developer, Vue developer, Svelte developer, Angular developer, whatever you like. Yeah, it's the only cross-platform framework that offers that, but also native access.
Awesome. Igor, sir, what you got?
I have some end-to-end testing cool stuff.
Sweet. Nikolai, if you can hear us, do you have anything you'd like to share?
Hello, everybody. Yes, I wanted to share some news from the latest release of NativeScript that is upcoming. Some new features from the Android runtime mainly, and from the iOS runtime. I just want to mention what's new is about to be released.
That's excellent. Thank you for that. What I wanted to share is that recently on a client project, we had a very difficult request to do an Apple Watch display. Now, this is something that is quite unique and, of course, characteristic on iOS. And it just so happened that there was this pretty amazing open source project that was created to do exactly this Apple Watch display. Now, it was written completely in Swift 4.1. In fact, I think it was written in Swift 2. It was recently updated to Swift 4. And the original author, I have to give some serious props to Gautier, and maybe Alex and Emil, if I am pronouncing that incorrectly, you can help, but a huge shout out to Gautier here. Amazing open source plugin, and it is a CocoaPod. And I was able to basically take this entire view and drop it right inside a NativeScript layout, and it worked just like this. And it was really just fantastic to see how NativeScript allowed me to do this in a matter of about an hour. And to actually look at the code is straight from the examples on the README as far as instantiating the view, initializing it with a delegate, and feeding it some image data to actually populate in this Apple Watch display. And it was just one of these things where I just sat back and thought, this really is amazing that I was just able to put this together in JavaScript. Just stunning. And that is my bit.
That's really cool.
That is really cool.
Thanks for sharing that. That looks really beautiful.
So we're going right back up to the top. Josh Sommer, feel free to expand on what you mentioned. And if you have anything else you want to say about it, feel free. Otherwise, we will continue.
Yeah, so one of the nice things about NativeScript is you're able to create different templates for your UI. We use Angular, and right now some of our components have an Angular template file for Android and a template file for iOS, and it allows you to create experiences that match the expected behaviors users have on Android and the expected behaviors users have on iOS.
In your projects, percentage-wise, do you find that using the iOS and Android templates is something you find yourself doing more often, or more on a very particular case-by-case basis?
It's more on a case-by-case basis. So like here, can you see this view?
Yep.
All right, so you can see right here, this is just pretty much a basic form view. But right now we have this action button up here on this is on Android, and it allows you to open up a menu as users expect with like kind of typical material design, and edit or delete this work hour record. On iOS, if you can, right here, can you see my mouse? Actually, I just realized.
Yeah, we could actually see a little selection marquee.
Okay. So on iOS, we actually have the menu there, but it's horizontally. So 3 dots horizontal, which is kind of the typical iOS pattern you'll see like in your music player or whatnot. And that allows you to open up a menu that is more iOS specific related.
Now that's nice. And now you do the change up with the different templates?
Yeah. So I know in this one here, we end up having a couple different templates, but Sometimes you don't have to do that. Sometimes you can do like annotate a property with like Android : or iOS : and then that property will only be bound on an Android template or an iOS template. Breaking those up kind of ends up being more depending on the use case and depending maybe how much you want to end up actually deviating between the two platforms.
It's nice to have that flexibility because sometimes you do get into pretty complex and very particular platform specific behavior that just makes sense to deal with on either in a certain way.
What's your threshold for whether you're going to implement one strategy or the other for how you're going to handle platform specific stuff?
So generally for me, if it's like a one-off thing, like maybe binding a class only to Android, then annotate it with like the Android : before binding the class. If it gets more in depth than that, then by all means, might as well do another template. And sometimes it's kind of hard to judge. Like it's one of those things you might start working on a component, and then it becomes, you realize it's just completely different on Android or it's completely different on iOS, and then you have to break them apart.
Gotcha.
I've found that similar case as well. It's nice with Angular to be able to create a component too. So when you do split the templates out, you have at least the parts that are the same isolated as a shared component between the two. That way the iOS and Android template is not a duplication of what's in both with only the customization that's different, which same with Vue as far as componentizing.
Does Vue allow you to have like Android or iOS like prefixes before bindings or classes or properties?
It sure does.
Nice.
Thanks for sharing that, Josh. That is definitely a really nice advantage with NativeScript. Jamie.
I wanted to talk about just how amazing NativeScript's architecture is as a point of collaboration for people who come from any sort of development background, whether they are React developers, Svelte developers, Angular developers, Vue developers, whatever. It's such an amazing architecture of framework. I don't really know how to put this into words, but it's just really convenient that, unlike in React Native, it's a framework which doesn't exclude anyone. If you have any problems with how any of the native modules work, you can step through the vanilla JavaScript code, you can debug it yourself, or you can file an issue and someone from some other background can come and solve it. Whereas in frameworks such as React Native, not only have you got to master the declarative aspect of React first, you've got to master the React Native bindings, how they actually expose native code to the JavaScript context, and the threading model, which is really, really hard to figure out. The fact that you have UI on a different thread to the JavaScript logic is just it introduces an insane number of problems. Whereas in NativeScript, it's all in the same place and you can do things synchronously, just as if you were writing native code.
Speaking of debugging, if you had an issue you were breakpointing and you were calling a native API from React Native and you needed to step into that sequence, is there a way to queue in the debugger to actually step into that sequence? Because I know in NativeScript you can put a breakpoint through every bit of native code that you're calling, and you can breakpoint that entire sequence.
For React Native, if you're going through native code, at least what I do is I open up, if it's iOS, I open up Xcode and I put debugger points in. Because when we're talking native code, we're normally talking native modules, probably only talking native modules. So you open up, you have to look for your Xcode project, find a particular native module, which might take you a few minutes, find a particular file, get the breakpoint in, and run your app and try to hit that code path. It's a lot of work. NativeScript, of course, let's be fair, we have fully native plugins as well. So it's the same aspect on that front. But if you are calling directly into native APIs using JavaScript, yes, you can open the Chrome debugger for NativeScript. And you can step through while in the JavaScript context, which is great fun.
Now, I like what you said a moment ago when you said NativeScript it allows anyone to interact with it. There's not really so much of a boundary between how you could interact with NativeScript, because at the end of the day, you're interacting with the platform. And so if you're interacting with the platform, anything that works with that platform, particularly JavaScript, you can essentially use NativeScript to do anything with that platform that you wish. I know React Native and NativeScript have ways to work together. Are there certain things you've seen as far as React Native and NativeScript working together that has been a significant challenge in either the way the frameworks are configured, but also something that is solvable?
So in terms of what sort of ecosystem sharing there is between NativeScript and React Native, the first thing to mention is that anything that is React based and is not coupled to the host meaning DOM or iOS or Android, anything that's pure React like Redux, or actually even the Redux library has got some things that are a little bit coupled to the DOM, but anything that's pure React, such as React Redux, I think that's one plugin, that works perfectly on React Native Script. But if we're specifically talking about React Native features such as native modules, that can't yet be shared with NativeScript. I reckon with a bit of work, it could totally be done, because NativeScript can figure out the bindings. It can expose anything that's exposed to Objective-C. So why couldn't it just crawl through an existing React Native module? The restriction is whether it's a UI module or not, because the moment that it's a React Native UI plugin, suddenly you've got to implement everything about how React Native handles UI. And unfortunately, React Native is coupled to React. So this is more of a React Native Script to React bridging rather than React Native Script to NativeScript to whichever flavor of NativeScript you like. It would be a lot of work.
That's one thing I know in the beginning with NativeScript that excited me a lot, is the fact that core modules and the way that it's set up is really a lot of helper utilities around accessing iOS and Android from JavaScript. But the UI layer is really something that, for sure, it's been stated as a part of NativeScript, but it's really could be optional. There'd really be nothing that would prevent someone from using NativeScript in a hybrid web app and actually use it to gain more direct functionality to the platform, perhaps going outside the Cordova ecosystem. So if you wanted to code with a web view, you still could, and then access some of the platform features through direct access with NativeScript. And it might provide a really nice developer experience, perhaps beyond what Cordova could provide.
I definitely think so. The thing that I like most about NativeScript is the runtimes. The cross-platform UI modules, of course, they're great. They're really easy to read, and they do what they say on the tin. But the runtimes are just magical. And the runtimes offer something to every JavaScript-based cross-platform framework. React Native is currently working towards the JSI, Turbo modules, and Fabric, and they're calling this the solution for all problems on the bridge. But they're totally missing the point. If you cannot call native APIs directly from the JavaScript context, if you cannot marshal those values back and forth between the contexts, and if you can't do things synchronously, and if your UI sits on a different thread to the native thread, then you haven't solved the problem of the bridge. If you could cram NativeScript into React Native and get the best of both, wow. You can cram NativeScript into any cross-platform framework. I think it could be, the runtimes could really offer so much to any framework.
Jamie, thank you for that. And I'd say we'll save some more of that discussion for next time. We can look at some examples of direct access versus bridge access and some of the parallels and things that would be advantageous one way or the other.
As a local React Native expert, I don't know if anybody else here is, but I know Jamie is. I would love to hear some more specific comparisons of what React Native has that NativeScript doesn't, and the other way around. You've mentioned some of the things that NativeScript does over React Native. I want to hear some other options. Maybe we can do that next time as well.
Sure.
Igor, did you want to expand on something there?
Sure. So there are ways to test your applications in NativeScript. Most likely you have heard about NativeScript Appium, which is fine, but I find it really difficult to set up on most machines. And I've been exploring doing end-to-end testing with Detox, which is commonly used library in React Native, and it works really well with NativeScript. So I'm working on turning it into a plugin. It should be really exciting.
Now, how do you interact with Detox? Is it written in a similar way that you would write a Selenium test for Appium, or is it completely different?
It's really similar. You can choose a test runner. For example, I really like using Jest. So you can just write your tests in any like test runner you like, and it's really simple. The syntax is really clean, and it's just so much easier.
Are there any speed improvements over Appium? I know sometimes the Appium test can be pretty heavy.
So Detox, as far as I know, isn't like Appium. It sort of has some pieces built into the app, so so it has like speed advantages. I feel like it's maybe 2 or 3 times faster in most cases.
I'm definitely going to have to check that out. I have not. Has anyone else on the call actually tried anything with that?
Not with Detox, but I've used Appium a little bit.
Yeah. Igor, thanks. On the next one, we might have to expand and look at an example in the future on that. That's very interesting.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you for sharing
a blog
that.
post or anything about how you set that up? Because it might be something I know I'd be interested in looking into more, especially.
Nothing yet. I've been just playing around with it. It works. So yeah, a blog post might be coming.
Awesome. Well, thank you for that. Shiva, do you have something you'd like to expand on?
Yes, today I want to show how to create a gradient action bar on iOS. Just recently, we had this need in NStudio project where we wanted gradient action bar, and they assigned this task to us. And there was this long-standing NativeScript issue where somebody is reporting that gradient action bar is not working on iOS. On Android, you'd simply assign a class to your native action bar and just set the CSS with some linear gradient, and you should see your gradient action bar on Android. But however, the same code doesn't work on iOS. So I had to dive a bit into native, and I've created a handy link. It's bit.ly/NativeScript iOS gradient action bar. And if you visit that, it just takes you to my gist. And I'll show you how easy it is to use this gist. I have created a simple TS project here. And as you can see, it just has a regular colored action bar. All you have to do is attach a loaded event on the action bar. Loaded action bar loaded. Just call it from here, on action bar loaded. And you just copy paste this into your code behind file. Those are the imports. And some declare stuff to make TypeScript compiler happy. And as you can see with that, this page now has gradient action bar. You can customize this the way you like. You can make it from red to blue.
Ooh, pretty.
That's that's not the best combination, but then let's look at the code real quick. So all I'm doing is creating a new CA gradient layer. I looked at how gradient layers are created by, I'm kind of explaining the process of how I arrived at this code. I went to search codes.nativescript.rocks. I searched for CA gradient layer because my journey began with this Stack Overflow link that Bundio, the creator of this issue, linked to. And that Stack Overflow had some answers of how to do it in iOS. And from there, I searched if somebody has used those stuff in NativeScript, and a very handy place to search that is searchcode.nativescript.rocks. And I looked at how CA gradient layer is created. And from there, I was able to create that gradient layer. And we're just getting the navigation bar bounds. So to get the navigation bar, are you able to hear me? To get the navigation bar, you can't directly get it from the page object. You have to get it from the frame topmost iOS controller navigation bar. And from there, you get the actual UI navigation bar on iOS. I'm just taking the bounds of the navigation bar and assigning that to the gradient layer. And along with that, I'm setting the colors of the gradient layer, and I'm setting the start point and end point to show where it starts and where it ends. From there, I'm creating a CG size make, which just creates a graphics size object. And from there, you can begin the UI graphics image context and then render the gradient into that image. So basically, this gradient layer that we created is converted into an image, and that image is assigned as the background of this action bar. And that's how we're getting the gradient action bar. I didn't do this wizardry. I just looked up the native code for this on Stack Overflow. I did have to make some modifications to implement it in the NativeScript way, but then it was pretty straightforward. And now that it's done, you see how easy it is to simply take this gist and implement gradient action bar in your own NativeScript apps.
Does this mean you can take screenshots of pretty much your entire screen in NativeScript, or just certain parts of it?
You should be able to take screenshot of certain parts of stuff in NativeScript.
So let's say I wanted to take the screenshot of the entire app the way it is now. Can I do that with similar code to this?
You should be able to do that. I've seen there is a NativeScript plugin to take screenshot of parts of your NativeScript app as well as the whole page. I remember previously using it. I can link you to that screenshot plugin.
Yeah, please. That's awesome.
Yeah.
The other question is Angular. I'm sorry, not Angular. Android. Would this work? Would you have something similar for Android?
Android already allows you to set gradient action bar, and that's what this issue talked about.
Oh, it's only on iOS. Got it.
So if you just assign a class to your action bar and set the background image, yep. It's already implemented on Android, and they even tried to implement it on iOS, and there's a PR here which got closed. They had implemented it, but the core team was not happy with the implementation, then they closed it down.
Mm-hmm.
I was asked to make some changes. Yeah. So currently it's not available.
Shiva, you mentioned two things there that were really interesting. Search code. I don't think a whole lot of people know about that. There's probably a few, but it is a very interesting way to find snippets of NativeScript. If you'll show that one more time, that's searchcode.nativescript.rocks. There's a lot of interesting snippets there if for anyone that's never seen that before. Also, It's important to note that everything you were just showing is just iOS development. Even though you're writing it in NativeScript, you're very much coding directly for iOS. And it's always important to realize that. These are all the powerful APIs that are available to all iOS developers.
In some of those things, you might see that the way it's written in Swift is completely different to the way it's written in Objective-C. For some of these things like render in context, for example, I had to look up how to do that because I couldn't find anyone else doing it in search code. So I had to mess around a bit and eventually arrived at the place where it's working now.
Yeah, those are some very powerful APIs. A lot of neat things can be done. Thanks for that, Shiva. Well, there you have it. NativeScript straight from the heart. And without further delay, we're out.